Edwards, and I am the program director at GLIS Western New York. So I oversee all of our direct youth services, all of our parent caregiver programs, and all of our in-school support services.
Hi, my name's Faith. I am our school support service coordinator. I'm also our GSA advisor liaison. So basically, I am making sure that we are communicating with schools across all 8 counties of Western New York, talking to our GSA advisors, making sure they're connected with each other. We're at like 115 at this moment, so we're building a really good, connection of people talking to each other in schools.
I'm Jenna. I'm a youth intern.
Lovely. Cool. So we're just gonna do a little bit. We don't have a ton of slides, so we were thinking this would be like a more open dialogue conversation. We're gonna tell you a little bit about our organization. I clicked the right button. There it is.
So this is GLIS's mission, and we're really excited about this. We rewrote our mission and did a lot of rebranding for our agency a few years ago, and so this is a mission that was written in partnership with our youth. So just building affirming cultures and supportive communities for youth regardless of their identity.
This is not my normal clicker. I feel like we should just talk a little bit more about like the actual organization.
Did you not put in the one?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, I brought flyers.
No,
so
I
there's
did not.
that too.
So essentially, we are a nonprofit organization based out of Buffalo, but we do service all 8 counties of Western New York. Primarily, we are working with LGBTQ plus youth, but we are working also with parents and caregivers, schools, community organizations, anyone and anywhere that like youth find themselves existing in their social circles and their communities. We want to make sure we're in all of those spaces to just provide like opportunities for community growth and education about the LGBTQ plus community.
So just some basic terminology. This by no means is exhaustive in any way, shape, or form, but when we were going out and doing a lot of these community engagement events, people were like, we would just like some more like sort of basic terminology. So LGBTQ, which you may be familiar with some of these terms or none of them at all, which is perfectly acceptable. The one I always like to draw folks' attention to is questioning. So folks who, especially for youth, may not be settled on an identity, may not be still in their process of developing their sense of self, so they may be in the questioning phase. And then SOGI is a term that we just use to stand for sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, so encompassing parts of the LGBTQ identity, sexual orientation, and gender identity, pretty self-explanatory. And then the one that we just sort of pull out is cisgender, so identifying with the gender that you're assigned at birth, and transgender, identifying with a gender identity that you were not necessarily assigned at birth.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, we love questions during the presentation. I do not like to stand up here and just talk for like 20 minutes straight because I don't want to hear my own voice. So we love, please feel free to hop in. Do not wait.
It's also important to note that like terminology is something that people get hung up a lot on.
Yeah.
We used to do when we do a lot of professional development trainings for staff and faculty.
Yeah.
And we would get a ton of questions about like, what does this word mean? What does this identity mean?
Yeah.
I don't understand this. How these sound the same? How are they different? And we found that we were spending an excessive amount of time giving definitions to terms that aren't as important as talking about the reasons this group of kids needs support in the different areas of their lives. And we think this is a pretty good list to explain the common themes that we often talk about, but we don't really go into like a ton of identity labels because we're of the belief that you could have 2 kids who identify with the same label and they can identify completely differently. They can have very different lived experiences within those terms.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because there are over like 75 terms being used in the LGBTQ community right now, and there's a debate on whether or not some of them are actually part of the community. There's just a lot of tangly things that happen that are less important than understanding that for us, being part of the LGBTQ community just means that you aren't experiencing your gender identity or sexual orientation in a way that is typically taught in our society or that other people might experience. And so just having those experiences in that way, and what are the risk factors that come with being a part of this community, and what kind of support do you need in this community?
Something else that's really cool that we didn't mention, normally we do mention, I identify as a straight ally, and the rest of our organization.
I identify as queer and non-binary, so.
It's really cool because this helps us provide dual perspective. That's why we always travel in pairs, God bless you. to make sure that we can give a different perspective to anyone, whether they have a lot of familiarity with the community or none at all, starting from scratch, or just have a couple of questions because they're starting to learn. And, we come from very different backgrounds. I'm from Western New York, G is not. And so we have a really great perspective within our organization to provide different outlooks, and people like to be able to relate to the different aspects of, learning information, but also finding, humanity within the people providing that information. So our group of kids is diverse, we're diverse, we like to provide that aspect and that interest, I suppose.
So these are just some basic things, and specifically when we always pull our data, we love statistics, we love data. This is from a really great project called the Family Acceptance Project, which was out of San Francisco State University. And it was something that had never been studied prior to this, which is what are the rates of having positive family acceptance for LGBTQ plus youth? What are the rates of if your family is accepting, if your community is accepting? And so this is a statistic about specifically youth's perception of becoming a happy, healthy, well-adjusted adult when they have family support. So as you can see, 92% of kiddos with extremely supportive family have a perspective that they're happy and healthy as adults. And that goes down to just 8% with not at all accepting family. And then there's a lot in between as well. So we really try to bring home the point that acceptance doesn't necessarily look like just one thing. I work with parents from a run of different backgrounds, from a run of different understandings. And for folks, a lot of times it's just, I love my kiddo so much, but I don't know how the heck to support them through this. Like, I need help, I need resources. I don't know where parents get help and resources. We were really one of the first organizations, specifically LGBTQ in Western New York, that started actually engaging parents, because a lot of people were just engaging with youth and not talking to parents and families. So we find that to be a really important part of our work.
This is also a really great statistic to use for conversations like this, because there are many statistics out there talking about the LGBTQ plus community. We always use empirical data when we're, providing information, providing trainings, because, there can be a lot of hearsay on if the information we're providing can be, positive or negative, whatever it is. So we will always like to have statistically backed data, but not a lot of that is skewed in a very positive perspective. It often talks about mental health concerns, rates of suicidal ideation, self-harm behaviors, rates of, homelessness, substance use, lots of different difficult things to have conversations about, especially if you're learning about supporting LGBTQ plus youth for the first time. It's often compounded with a lot of oh, if you don't support them, this laundry list of terrible things could potentially happen. And so we like to provide the perspective of, if you are accepting, if you're open to learning about the community and being a supportive adult, one supportive adult in the life of an LGBTQ plus youth reduces their risk of suicidal ideations by 42%. That's one youth. That's one adult in the life of a youth. And so if we continue to increase those numbers, their rates of self-harm behaviors drop statistically and very dramatically. And so, this is a really great way to start bridging the conversations, especially when, we often talk that if we can't have and know that youth are going home to a safe environment, we hope to build those environments in school. And it's less likely that youth have both of those positive environments, but we want to make sure that the conversations we're having in school communities also include their lives outside of school, and that involves home. Keep clicking the wrong button.
Okay, so just some frequently asked questions. These were mostly questions that we had collaborated with some parents, and I had some teachers as well look at this to just be what are the sort of main starting point questions that you would want answered? So how do you better support youth? Really, when we say things like acceptance, when we say things like support, that can be really overwhelming, especially if you're not familiar with what resources are or what that might look like in supporting. But really what we're talking about is just basic being listening, being respectful, and being educated on the available resources if needed, and being okay with calling in folks like us and being okay to reach out for those resources and support that you need. And then what do we offer? As Faith mentioned a little bit about the background of our organization, our really number one priority is making sure that youth have healthy interactions with the people in their lives, be it their peers, be it their parents, be it their teachers, that youth have those supports in place. to feel really safe in whatever environment they're in, homeschool, what have you. And so one of the pieces is I run our drop-in center as well as our support groups for our youth to make sure that they have a safe place to go and that they're interacting with adults who are positive role models for them, because a lot of youth in our community, just in general, regardless of identifying as LGBTQ, don't have those positive spaces and role models where they feel safe. And then we do a lot of fun sort of community-based events. We do a big dance in the summer where the youth can dress however they want, bring whomever they want, and just come and enjoy and be in a safe, substance-free, safe environment. And we also work really closely with That's Faith, mostly doing our school and community organizations work. So we've been doing a lot of trainings recently, which has been really great. We are a subchapter of the national organization GLSEN, which is the foremost on LGBTQ youth educational resources. So we use all of their training curriculums to do our safe space trainings and our professional development trainings for teachers. We're also happy we've gone and trained a couple of community organizations as well, and groups like that. And then more information. I also have on the table our flyers, and then there is a little QR code where you can register to sign up for our parent newsletter. So you can get information about what is currently going on in the community for our parents. And then Faith's card is there as well, so you can contact.
That's it slide-wise.
That's it slide-wise. So really, we just want to open it up. If you guys have any sort of questions, if you have any sort of feedback, where is yours?
So any advice for families or kids, out in East Aurora, access to you guys probably isn't as great as, folks who live out.
Yeah, for sure.
Where you are. What's the best way if they want to get a hold of you, or, do you guys do stuff outside of Buffalo community?
Yeah, we absolutely do. So I do, specifically for our youth, I do both our support group and our drop-in center virtually. So I do our support groups once a month virtually, and I do our drop-in center once a week virtually, which we started doing during COVID. And I have a lot of kids that are like Allegheny County that don't have any kind of resources out there that come to those. So they're pretty well attended for our youth. And then for our parent engagement, we do a lot of virtual sort of engagement events where you can come and meet other parents in a virtual space if you need to. But we also really have been moving into doing a lot of events with other community partners, spaces that people are familiar with, comfortable with, either be it in a church space, be it in something like Boys and Girls Club, or be it in community areas.
Yeah, and school-wise, GSA-wise, we are always available to come speak to a GSA at a school. We travel for that, so we don't need to ask other, transportation is always a barrier for many different reasons, especially pertaining to this community. But school-wise, we always come to the schools to provide any information for students. In the spring, we'll be hosting our annual Youth Leadership Conference, which is an opportunity for all of the local GSAs, community organizations, any youth who identify as LGBTQ or allies, to come together in a space and, attend workshops. It's leadership opportunities, community building, and we provide all of the transportation for that if your community organization or your school cannot provide that for you. So that's a really neat opportunity to meet kids in their general area. We do a northern tier and a southern tier organization, so they're slightly closer geographically, but also we're in the process of starting regional GSA meetings, but that doesn't mean that your school has to have a GSA for those kids to attend.
Yes.
If you are a youth that identifies as LGBTQ+, if you are a youth that has family members or siblings, or you just want to be a supportive ally, you can always come to those spaces. And if there is a community organization like a library or any of the others that you mentioned that is interested in hosting one of those events, you can always contact us and we would be happy to help organize that event for you, or potentially proctor it, whatever you feel most comfortable doing.
Exactly. And I think what's important for us is if we are going into a community where we're not necessarily, it's a community like Faith mentioned, I'm not even from Western New York originally. So if I'm going into that space, I want to go into that space with contacts, with people who understand what's going on in your community. And I want to hear about that and hear how we can support you. And then in terms of parents, I am always happy to just hop on a Zoom call, hop on a phone call, answer an email. We also have a ton of great resources on our website that we're continuing to build out. So I would highly recommend just going to our resource page. Obviously, our website's on our flyers and our information, and just looking through those. And really, one of our most important pieces, I think, is just being out in the community. And especially since COVID, as we all know, we missed the chance to sort of make those community connections and to hear from folks like you about what is going on in the community where we could be of support, or what are some spaces where you might want education or resources or trainings, or if you feel like you already have understanding and knowledge, then how can we support you in engaging in community with that?
We've also been invited to like very interesting alternative spaces, like community resource fairs, or like, we got an email once about coming to a farmer's market. We really will come to you in any way that is most accessible for you all, because we want to be able to make those services readily available for you.
Can you guys talk a little bit, I know you hit on this a little bit, but maybe for a parent or for a student who might not exactly know what to expect, but what are some of the things that, come up and get talked about, or what are some, I guess just common things that are themes that maybe in these conversations and things that you guys have?
Sure. I can take I'll do parent perspective first. So number one, as I mentioned, most of the time when I'm talking with parents, it's like, I love my child. I can tell that they're going through something. I can tell that they need support, but I have nowhere to start. I'm not sure what resources are available, or there's no programming in my community, or what have you. And I think that's where it's really helpful from my perspective as an LGBTQ adult to be able to share with parents my experience, and to be in community role modeling that for our youth as a successful adult, especially someone who is in the space of doing education and doing advocacy work and modeling that. And a lot of parents are like, I feel so much better because I know my kid is going to be okay. I know that they're going to be fine now. So that's a lot of what parents come up with, is just sort of talking through what are any potential sort of fears that you might have, what are areas that you need further resources on, mostly when it comes to, specifically when we're talking about youth who are working through some sort of gender identity journey. There are different types of support that they might need than a youth who's identifying as gay or lesbian or bisexual. So talking through what kind of supports that they may need, what's appropriate for whatever developmental age they are, that is a lot of the work that I do with parents, and then making sure that parents have the resources that they need to talk to other family members and to talk to people in community. Then from the youth perspective, a lot of what I get questions from youth are just how do I exist in the spaces that I'm in as my authentic self? How do I figure out who I am as a person, and how do I live as my authentic self and be happy and feel fulfilled and feel whole? Which again, as a queer adult, it gives me a lot of opportunity to talk about, I'm originally from Texas, so I had some negative experiences in community growing up. And I was able to have my mom, who is super duper supportive of me, and that made a huge difference in my life. So I can talk to our kiddos about what it looks like to have a supportive family. If you have folks around you, finding your own community, whether it be your GSA in your school, whether it be another group, finding, how do you find community? How do you work through those pieces of identity? Because when it really boils down to it, for a lot of these kiddos, they're already going through, especially our middle school age kiddos, they're already going through such a horrible, middle school stinks. They're already going through such a horrible time of trying to be a part of something, to trying to feel like they fit in. And so they just feel really ostracized. And so giving them that sense of hey, somebody's here to listen to you, somebody cares, and I hear what you need. And I can not just be here to listen, but I can also give you tools to advocate for yourself. So for a lot of our youth, I have conversations about, how do I come out to teachers or family or friends? How do I make sure that I stay safe when I'm at school, or on the school bus or in community? How do I engage and not just be a passive member, but also like start doing advocacy work? Those are really a lot of the things that come up, and just letting them know they're not alone, letting them know being a role model of success, and letting them know that no matter kind of what pieces of it you're facing, that all of those big issues that we see so commonly with LGBTQ, like Faith was talking about, mental health, substance use, homelessness, that those can be mitigated by finding your community and finding that support.
Yeah, school perspective wise, it always comes from a place of preventative concern.
Yeah.
Especially when working within a school, I talk to administrators, teachers, school support staff, custodial workers, bus drivers. Anyone who is involved and employed within a school community has different types of concerns, but the main concern always comes from the place of, is the information that our organization provides age appropriate to talk to in a school setting? And as an organization who is dedicated to working specifically with youth, we only work with youth ages 5 to 21. All of the information we provide is age appropriate for the different contexts. We have conversations in elementary school, preschools, high schools, colleges, middle schools. We gear all of our information to be completely and 100% age appropriate. But the big taboo that surrounds this community ends up being a lot of the fact of they're going to be concerned that sex is always the really big one. And like, sex is not a scary word, I promise. And so being very open and honest about the fact that 90% of the time, that is not something that ever comes up in our conversations with youth. We very, very rarely talk about sex or sexual education anyways. And if we do, we're talking about it from an inclusive sex ed perspective of knowing information so you can protect yourself, because this community is at very high risk for being sexually victimized because they don't have accurate and authentic information on that conversation. But that is a very, very small percent of the topics that we cover. Our motto and the things that we're trying to communicate to school districts are respect, kindness, and acceptance at any age level, of teaching administration how to make your policies and procedures more inclusive in a written stance, so LGBTQ plus kids can see themselves visualized and respected within your school's policies. It's talking to middle school and high school educators about how to include classroom examples of LGBTQ plus youth so kids can see themselves represented in their education. And when kids see themselves represented in their education, they're more likely to be involved. Their participation goes up, their attendance goes up, their grades increase. And, a lot of what we are talking about with school administrators and staff and faculty is, how do we build a safe space so these kids feel comfortable coming to school? That's such a big hurdle. As you talk, middle school and high school is such an intimidating age for many kids because they're trying to fit in, they're trying to find friends, they're trying to find them a sense of self. And if you are trying to do all of that and trying to find how you fit in within the LGBTQ plus community potentially, you don't want to focus on school. You don't focus on your grades because you have so many other compounding thoughts. And so it's teaching just how to make your classroom a safer space, what kinds of things to hang on the walls or outside your office door to make kids feel comfortable coming to talk to you. How do you build rapport and relationships with students without completely derailing your curriculum conversations in your classroom to show that you are a supportive and affirming adult? Because once your kids see that reflected in the people who, whether educators believe it or not, they really do look up to you and they model their behaviors after the precedents you set, your kids will start participating in school more and be more, happy to engage in extracurricular activities and find places within their community that they belong. But, it always comes from a place of hesitancy. People are afraid of what they don't know of. I always tell a story that I grew up in a town like a little less than an hour south of here, and I didn't know anybody who identified as gay. I didn't know anyone who ever talked about LGBTQ identities. I used the term queer because I thought it meant like weird and stupid, and I would like openly call my friends that. But it wasn't until I like left my home community and went to college, or it doesn't have to be college, but just learning new perspectives, learning about people's different identities, learning that that not everybody looks and thinks like you. And it didn't take until someone was like, do you know what that word means? And I was like, no, but I don't want you to think I'm uncool because I don't, because I thought it was a cool thing to say. Then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like being super offensive. And that was never my intent. And so it really opened my eyes to learning about different perspectives. And so it's just about providing educational opportunities with no, objectives at the end. It's just open, honest education. We are always a safe space to talk to. We always say, like, there really are no stupid questions. We would much rather you ask us questions than have to rely on kids who identify as LGBTQ to justify their identities or explain themselves to you. Some kids really enjoy talking about this community and spreading education, but it shouldn't be something they have to do because we can be that resource for many people.
The other piece of it that I always kind of hit on, especially with our youth-specific engagement, I do a lot of one-on-ones with youth who are very trepidatious about joining program and being around other kiddos.
Good use of the word trepidation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I get the stars tonight. But I do a lot of one-on-ones with those youth, and I always am of the mindset, I'm a social worker, I'm a licensed master social worker, almost, I gotta get my letter of licensure, I'm almost there. But from that perspective, I'm always let the youth lead the conversation. I never come in with a set rule or a set agenda of what we're gonna talk about or anything of that matter. I'm always like, tell me why you're here. Tell me what we're talking about. What do you need from me in terms of support and from that perspective? And honestly, like I mentioned, for a lot of these kiddos, sometimes even their identity or questions surrounding the LGBTQ community don't come up. And it's more like, how do I make friends? How do I fit in? How do I just function normally and happily? So really letting the youth take our conversations and lead them and let me know where they want to go with it is also extremely helpful. And it teaches me a lot. I learned so much from our kiddos. They're so smart. I'm like, how did you guys get to be so smart? It's ridiculous.
That's the really great thing about our programs is not everything has to be centered around LGBTQ for conversations. What we do is we create a 100% safe and affirming space, and that's very, very rare. We can educate people on how to build those spaces, but we cannot ensure that a space that we aren't creating ourselves will be safe 100% of the time. You can't control the people in the space, their own personal thoughts and beliefs and ideologies. Can't control where it's located, but when we provide programming, when we come into a space, we are making sure we're setting the guidelines for whatever happens in this space is safe, whether it be a physical or metaphorical space. And oftentimes our youth are just so relaxed to be in a space where they can be themselves. We don't talk about any of the things that pertain to the LGBTQ plus community. We talk about movies and music and musical theater and anime and
musical
books.
theater, though.
The musical theater one's a conversation I always start. I'm guilty of it. And it's just their interests and their hobbies. And a lot of people are like, aren't you supposed to be having educational opportunities? Our conference is a really great example of that. We have workshops that span from purely just entertainment and fun to very educational.
Yeah.
And it's just to provide, those resources for those kids. Just give them opportunities to be kids and have conversations of things they're interested in. Encourage them to talk about their hobbies. Encourage them to talk about their likes and their interests.
And then I think there's always the question of how much do we support, and I think this is a thing that happens a lot with youth agencies, is how much are we actually engaging parents when a youth comes in to have a conversation, when am I going to talk with a parent about what's going on with that youth? Because a lot of parents don't want to lose that individual connection with their youth, or they're worried that this is going to somehow break the pattern of conversation or the ability for the youth to feel comfortable coming to them, or that there's going to be some sort of stopgap. So for parents, I always am our number one thing is always, if we can have a supportive, because of the exact statistics that we showed you, if we can engage a parent in some way, regardless of what the level of support currently might be, I'm going to try to engage that parent. That is always our policy. I obviously take our youth confidentiality very seriously, as I would, when you're in any youth serving space or any educational space. But my number one thing is parent, caregiver, whomever you live with, your grandma, your aunt, I want you to be involved in that youth's life as much as they feel comfortable with and as much as I can help them feel comfortable with. And so that's always our lead when we're trying to engage or help facilitate conversations between parents and youth.
What are some common questions or concerns that parents have? What are the most common questions they have for you or?
So really a lot of parents, especially for our youth who identify as trans or gender nonconforming, are really concerned about making sure that their youth have the right support in school and community when it comes to like name change or change of pronouns. How do I talk to family members is a big one. Like I have a lot of parents who are extremely, extremely supportive, but they may have family members who are just not ready to talk about that, are not ready to talk about their child being trans or being gay, however they identify. And I think the big thing too that I hear from parents is, you know, when my kids are coming to program, what exactly is the point of them going to Bliss? And like, what is the purpose of this space? And that's where we talk a lot about it being a safe space for those youth. And we focus a lot on making sure that parents are kept in the loop as much as possible to help quell some of those fears of not being involved or having difficult conversations. Another sort of common question that I have with parents is the question of, is my kid gonna be okay? You know, I know there's a lot of really negative statistics about the community that are very, unfortunately for youth, very, very true. Mental illness, substance use, things of that nature. So a lot of parents are just really worried, like, is my kid gonna be okay? Are they gonna grow up to be like a happy, functional adult? So really talking about how important it is for the kiddos to engage in community, how important it is for you to have support for yourself. And I always tell adults, when I'm training adults, when I'm talking with parents, I'm always like, please give yourself some grace. Like, you might mess up, you might not know what an identity means at all. You might mess up a name, you might mess up a pronoun. You may not know even where to begin at supporting a child, but that's okay. Give yourself some grace and be kind to yourself. Because a lot of this requires unlearning a lot of the things that we've learned over long periods of time in school or in our families. So making sure that you're kind to yourself is a big one that I always tell adults.
Something that often comes up also is like, do you have resources for affirming mental health care, for
Yes.
affirming, you know, physical health, or, you know, recommendations that we have from our community resources? And we're all very much about a warm handoff for different community organizations. And we're very much of the belief if we don't provide it in-house, we know someone who does, and we have really great connections with a lot of different community organizations. And, you know, this is not just like community organizations that exist in Erie County. We try to really expand into all of those counties because we understand that, you know, lack of service is a wide problem in our Western New York community. And so we talked about how travel can be a barrier. That's a difficult, you know, thing to overcome, especially for kids who may not be out to their families or have lack of transportation. And so we really do try to find the best areas to provide references for any concern that may come up or any opportunity that families may need.
Yeah, we work really closely with Best Self, which has sites all across
All
Western New York, to make sure. So the other thing that I always like to tell folks is we don't provide any in-house counseling or behavioral health services. We work in partnership with agencies like Best Self to refer for those, because what we really focus on is that peer interaction and mentoring and youth leadership piece. And we would much rather partner with agencies that have a dedicated program. And like Best Self has a dedicated program for gender affirming counseling. They have dedicated LGBTQ counselors. So we partner with those agencies to make sure that we're able, because we're a tiny agency, we're only like, I think there's 5 people now?
I think there's 5 of us.
We're 5 full-time people and a few fabulously dedicated interns who drove out here in the rain, to be at this presentation. So we're a very tiny agency, and so being able to partner with those larger agencies who are experts in the field of substance use, mental health, homelessness, really make sure we can get those youth the comprehensive net of services they need.
So you guys, you know, so you are tiny, but
We are.
established in what
Tiny
you're
but
doing.
mighty.
Yes.
So for parents or for kids who aren't familiar with you, can you talk a little bit about like, so are you trained in a certain way? Like
Yeah,
what kinds of
absolutely. Yeah,
credentials do you bring to what you do?
Absolutely. So I am, as I mentioned, almost licensed. I got my MSW from University at Buffalo. Our executive director is also an LMSW. We don't require you have an LMSW to be on
just
staff.
kind
We
of
just happen to be. But specifically, especially in our school partnerships, we are working to credential youth peer advocates currently. So a youth peer advocate is a credential from the state of New York. It's the same credential that's used by a variety of, it's used by mental health advocates, it's used by Horizon, it's used by a variety of services to credential a young adult aged 18 to 30 who has experience in the community, lived experience, either dealing with mental illness, substance use, or social emotional issues. And it is quite a rigorous credentialing process. It's about 6 months worth of training where you go through and understand. So it's beyond just being a mentor. It's a lot more about teaching youth how to self-advocate and about being in that peer space. So we are in the process of training those two folks right now, and I will be their direct supervisor. So it's really important for us to come at it also as well from a multidisciplinary perspective and make sure that we're not all just social workers or all psychologists, that we are coming at it from the perspective of folks with lived experience, folks with academic experience, folks with experience in different varieties of academic or professional pursuits.
Yeah, my background is specifically in psychology, but also queer history and women, gender, and sexuality studies. So I became like academically ingrained into the community, but you know, my professional experience solely exists working within this community. I've had like 4 different job cyclists. Personally, I'm trained in restorative justice and mental health first aid. A lot of our different staff members have different, you know, we're very much of the continuing education belief. So as a staff, we all attend different trainings and different, you know, certifications throughout our years working at GLIS to learn different perspectives from different community organizations about how we can better serve our youth. Like one of our staff members has like an arts degree, a film degree. Like we're very much of the belief that you don't have to have like certain credentials or education. However, most of us do, especially our staff who do provide trainings and direct youth services. But, you know, having a wide range of experience of working with this community and finding different ways to support them.
The other really important thing is that, as Faith mentioned, and as we were talking through, you know, sort of our empirical evidence, like the materials that we use. So as I mentioned, being a subchapter of GLSEN, we also use materials and evidence, empirical evidence from the Trevor Project, which is a nationally recognized LGBTQ mental health project. That's where a lot of our content for engaging youth and having conversations about what does good mental health look like, what does coping techniques look like. And the other, specifically, we're trained in the method QPR, which is question, persuade, refer, which is a peer support method for folks who are imminently experiencing suicidal ideation or potential harm. So we really like that because it is from a perspective of someone who is not a mental health professional, being able to question someone, provide them resources, and make sure that they get to a safe mental health space, rather than necessarily you needing to be a trained mental health professional. So that's the model that we use if I have a youth in crisis. And as Faith mentioned, we go to quarterly trainings as staff. That looks like anything from like how do you comply with HIPAA laws to like what are minors' rights in schools to we're very much about the fact that we're still learning as human beings, and there are always evolving like ways of doing things, especially when it comes to youth services and development. There's always new things out there. So learning as much as we can, looking at the data, collecting our own understanding of what methods work, what methods are empirically proven, using using really nationally trusted things like American Psychology Association and SHAMSA and things like that. Exactly.
Yeah, and you know, we provide a lot of information during like our professional development trainings for schools, staff and faculty, and like community organizations that a lot, we talk about federal laws and New York state laws specific. While G and I are not lawyers.
We legally have to say.
Yeah, our boss Jack really likes us to like hit that point home. We're not lawyers. However, we do spend an extensive amount of time doing research backed by all of those organizations that have proven information. We really consult like New York State guidelines a lot, but we have really great relations with many, you know, lawyers. We have a lawyer on our board, everything that we provide legality-wise is always approved by someone who does, is a real lawyer. We are not real lawyers. I thought I was gonna be Elle Woods, but I'm not. It's sad, but it's true. But everything is backed. We have lots of different, our board members are also very diverse, and they have so many wonderful educational backgrounds in different professions that give really great insight. We talk about wanting these kids to see like successful queer adults. Our board consists of predominantly very successful queer adults from very diverse backgrounds in very diverse lines of work, and we often try to have opportunities where our youth get to hear their stories, hear their perspectives, hear how they came to be in their professions, but also their personal coming out stories. And it's just about building community and building understanding about the different ways that we all, can interact with each other. But all of our information is 100% A-OK by people who are much smarter than we are.
Yeah, basically.
Any other questions?
I'm wondering if you ever have, as you said, the middle school years are really difficult. They suck.
Yeah.
And that can extend into high school, obviously, especially 9th and 10th grade.
Yeah.
And I do think it's great that 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 a lot of strides are being made to make sure that the LGBTQ community feels safe and seen. But I have to wonder, do you have kids that come to you at some point thinking that maybe they have a gender identity, that's different than their assigned at birth gender, but then after a period of time they realize, no, I was born a male, I am a male, or whatever, a female, this was just part of that crazy adolescence time, and how do you work with those kids?
Yeah,
What's
so
the outcome for that?
sure. So I would say specifically for a lot of the youth that we work with, I do have a lot of youth who come in questioning, who are like, I'm not sure how I identify. That's definitely something we have a lot. But I would say specifically for youth who come in and have a sort of established idea of their identity, for the most part, it stays pretty consistent throughout those adolescent years, as long as they have the correct support in place so that they feel like they can be themselves. Where I tend to see potential like concerns or trepidations is if the youth doesn't necessarily feel safe being that authentic self in their environment. And the other piece of it is, I think it's important to support kids in that journey and let them know that it's okay to make those strides, and it's okay to think through your identity as potentially you're going to start in one place and you may end up someplace different, and that's okay. And just making sure that they feel safe while they're doing that exploration is the most important thing to us. I think where the concern happens a lot of times is if youth don't feel safe in that space and they feel that they need to rush to a decision, or they feel like someone is like, okay, well, because you identify this way, you need to do X, Y, and Z steps, right? So we very much encourage, like I mentioned, youth-led conversations. We don't give any specific advice when it comes to medical concerns, when it comes to, like I said, mental health concerns. So specifically for youth questioning their gender identity, we always refer out for any medical aspects of that might happen. We always refer out to any psychological or gender affirmation counseling that is needed. What we're more there to do is to create that safe space so that they feel comfortable exploring that in such a way that they don't have to rush to a decision or they feel pushed into that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Statistically speaking, I do not want to provide you false numbers. However, there is, just because numbers are just like circling around in my head, there is like empirical data that says that youth who identify as trans or gender nonconforming, statistically a very vast majority, I really want to say it's higher than 80%, but I'm not going to give you the number that's in my head because it might be wrong. But it's at least higher than 80% of the youth who do identify as trans or gender nonconforming in their younger adolescent years continue to live.
It's 94.
Oh, I thought it was 97. See, that's why I didn't tell you.
So.
Can you 100%
You want me
tell me it's 94?
Yeah, okay, so, a recent, what Faith is talking about, there aren't a lot of studies, this is the other thing, right? And this is the thing that we really advocate for, is there aren't a lot of empirical studies,
Right.
because youth don't really feel comfortable talking about their identity, it's really hard to sometimes do like scientific studies with kiddos. So there isn't as much study out there as we would like about what youth experience, for example, especially with gender identity specifically, like as a child, there are some really good comprehensive studies that have been started to come out in the last couple of years. And the one Faith is talking about is the largest study that was ever done with a cohort of youth who identified specifically as transgender from ages 6 to 12. And that cohort was followed from, they began at age 6 to 12 and they were followed into adulthood, and 94% of them at the end of that journey were still identifying with whatever gender identity they started out with.
What year was that study?
That was 2017. So obviously landscape things certainly are continuously changing, which is why we always advocate for ongoing scientific study as
Yeah.
well.
And you'll find that, data is skewed for many predominant reasons. Like the last US
Of course.
consensus under our last presidency did not include LGBTQ plus identities in the US consensus. So those numbers will be skewed in our historical context for all of time because they just weren't included in the census. But that happens with a lot of empirical studies, is if you are not comfortable self-identifying, then the information is skewed. Any other questions? I love that we got to talk
Yeah,
about
we love
this.
all the questions.
That was super
Thank you,
fun.
friends. That's awesome.
That was a great question.
It's definitely one that we hear a lot because it is a concern, especially for that developmental age range. Is like it can be hard to parse out, and you do not ever want a student to go through something or a child to go through something that is going to make their experiences in middle school harder than they need to be, which is again why we focus on just creating a safe space for them to explore that rather than necessarily saying, okay, you identify as trans, you need this, 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 and this. It's very driven by the individual youth need.
Absolutely.
And like I said, sometimes what they need isn't even related to their identity at all.
Feel that labels are just getting out of hand
I would
in our
agree with that.
society.
I would agree with that.
And, yeah, so that's really encouraging.
Awesome.
Anybody else? Sorry, we ended 10 minutes early.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so please take flyers and cards. There are plenty, and you can just click the QR code on your phone to sign up for our parent newsletter if you're interested in coming into any of our events. Please feel free to, we're so small that like if you shoot Faith and I or you
Right.
shoot us an email on the website, one of us will figure out who the best person is to handle it. So please don't hesitate at all to reach out if you ever need anything.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope it stopped raining, everybody.
Oh, it's gonna rain.
It's gonna stop raining.
I gotta drive back to the city, so